used to do this every season, and then I realized this morning that winter has finished in March and I've not done one of these. I'm just gonna call this what I watched recently without pretending that I'm doing these every season, but technically I am, if it makes sense. I'm ashamed of how late I am, so bear with me. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The English Reader. Usually I talk about books, but I also happen to watch TV and want to discuss what I watched recently. As always, I'm dividing them by categories, and without further ado, let's delve into what I watched recently. And let's start with a bang. So, The Haunting of Bly Manor is another series by the same creator of The Haunting of Hill House that you can find on Netflix as well, which was adapted from the book The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Bly Manor is actually based on The Turn of the Screw, which I've never read, and so I went into these kind of blind. The only reference I had was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware, a book that I'd read just before watching this. The premises of this TV show, which you can watch without having seen The Haunting of Hill House, as the two stories are not related, they just happen to have some of the same actor. And The Haunting of Bly Manor is about this nanny who is fleeing from USA, I believe, because something happened there, and she, for a series of events, become the nanny of this very wealthy family that has this huge property in England, in the countryside, and her task is to go there and take care of the two children after they've been orphaned. And the uncle who's supposed to take care of them is a very famous lawyer or businessman that works in London, so he cannot take care of the children, so he hires this nanny. And when she goes there, it turns out that there is something very creepy happening in the house. Now, when you summarize it like I just did, it kind of sounds like the usual haunted house story, and it's actually so more than just that. It's actually such a layered, complex story, such a well-crafted and entertaining plot, and all the characters. I'd not say that it's fast moving per se, but it's such a fascinating tale that it's been told to you that you're honestly glued to the sofa, chair, wherever, the bed, wherever you are gonna watch this or whether you watch this. And I was mesmerized by the whole thing. Now, I don't really watch any scary things. I love horror books, I read a lot of them, but I think the visual format, it just upsets me, it doesn't make me sleep at night, so usually I tend to stay clear of it. But because I'd watched The Haunting of Hill House before, I knew that somehow I could take this on, and although it is horror, it's not an horror I cannot handle. However, this scared the living shit out of me. There was something about what's going on in the house and the idea behind this that absolutely terrified me, so I ended up giving these 5 stars. If you've never watched one of these, I rate these as I rate books on Goodreads, so I rate them from 1 being shit to 5 awesome. And I can honestly, from the performances, the plot, the entertaining, and the scariness of it all, because at the end of the day it's a horror TV show that wants to scare you, I have to give it 5 stars. I think it was wonderfully crafted and I cannot recommend this enough. But I did have trouble sleeping at night. It did upset me, but it was generally so fascinating that I cannot not recommend these. And I'd say that if you're used to watch horror or all these, this is definitely something that you can probably handle. I just found very disturbing and yet at the same time attractive as a story. Then another series I've been watching and I'm almost done completely with it, it's Friends. I don't even know which seasons I've watched in the winter. I know that it's a 5 stars. I love Friends. I don't know why it took me so long to actually got around to watch it. It's definitely something that entertains and makes me laugh all the time, and I cherish the characters. I get the hype, 5 stars. Then I watched a K-drama, and the way Korean dramas, K-dramas work is that usually you get only 1 season, so the story is self-contained. And in this TV show, and in this one in particular, which is based on a comic, a very famous comic series, I believe, a webtoon. I think it's a web comic book that's very on trend in Korea, and it's basically the story of this girl who is very ugly according to the standards, the beauty standards of Korea. And what happens is that one day she finds out that with makeup she becomes this very beautiful girl, and she kind of starts living this double life. And of course there is a lot of romance in it. Then we got the male primary lead interest, the main love interest usually is a very handsome guy, might be a K-pop idol, might be an actor. And then you've got a second lead, which usually is a contender for the attention of the girl. And there is something called the second lead syndrome, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's something that definitely got me in this. Now, the main protagonist, the male main protagonist of this K-pop idol, who is without any doubts, for any beauty standards, absolutely gorgeous. However, there was a second lead that's definitely more my style. I absolutely loved him as a character. As a human being, he's gorgeous. So I suffered through this just because you already know pretty much how these Korean dramas tends to go. So I already knew what was happening, and I actually skimmed watch the last episode just because I didn't want to see the end. Said that, I do love the main protagonist, I do love the main couple. I think this was definitely very cute, fluffy, and at the same time so bloody funny. I think usually these days I struggle watching these all the way through because I get a bit bored just because they're pretty much the same format. But when they are hilarious as this one, I definitely have a good time watching that. I gave this 4.5 stars. I absolutely did not complain. Highly entertaining, very, very funny. So if you've never watched one of these, so the format might be very new to you, I'd say, and you really want to laugh, because at the end of the day, even if you don't like a main couple, even if you're not there for the love story, there is so much more content that's based on comedy in this one. And there are some nice social comments as well about beauty standards and all of that. It's very entertaining, it's well done, it's cute, and it might be a good starting point. And finally, I have watched and finished How to Get Away with Murder. The last season is one of my ultimate favorite TV shows ever. I love the concept of this lawyer teaching at a very important university in USA, a bunch of law students, and she kind of have these proteges, and in the third season there's this bunch of girls and boys that she chose as her favorite, quote unquote, get in a lot of trouble. There is murder and they have to get away with it, and it's such an interesting premise. However, it's it's dramatic. So it's the same creator, Shonda Rhimes, that created Grey's Anatomy. So if you watch Grey's Anatomy, or if you know what Grey's Anatomy is, you probably guessed how dramatic this is. The stakes are higher in this just because of the nature of the plot, I guess. But at this season I gave it 4 stars. I think it suffered a little bit from trying for, the 5th time, 6th time to do something that already had been done before. So again, this is one of those TV shows that it can become a bit redundant, and they try to steer clear of it while maintaining the same format. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I loved it, but there is a lot of things that I didn't appreciate as other season. I don't know if it was the ending that got to me. I grew to love this character, and I should have not cared for them, knowing what was going to happen, knowing the format, knowing how Shonda Rhimes likes to do things and break hearts. But there is a gem in this, which is Viola Davis, and her performance as Annalisa Keating is stunning. It is honestly, at the end of the day, despite my rating, despite what I can say, it is a very innovative TV show that does something that I've not watched before, and I don't think I'm gonna see anytime soon. And it does that with amazing actor and an amazing lead actress that can convey such emotions. In some of the season, I was a mess after watching her performance in certain scenes. It is remarkable and it is worth your time. At least I'd say if you like legal crime things, you cannot miss this one. then for documentaries, the first one I watched was Death 2020, which is a very short documentary on Netflix. I think it's an hour long or something, and it gets some famous people to talk about 2020 and what happened in the pandemic. I gave it 3 stars. It was what it was. I think it was kind of humor, which is not necessarily my kind of humor, and so I didn't find it as funny as probably other people will, but at the same time it was a nice recap of a very shitty year. Then if you're new, you'd want to know, if you've been here for a while, you know that I love true crime, so I've watched Real Detectives, which is a series on Netflix about real cases. There are actors doing some of the scenes, but then you got the real investigators, detectives, they actually resolve the crime, and you get basically them telling you in one episode each the worst or one of the worst cases, or one of the cases that they got attached the most and how they solved the case. And I found the format very fascinating. I think it was very interesting stories, very different one from each other. There were a couple that piqued my interest a bit less, so I ended up giving this 4.5 stars instead of 5, but overall it was a really nice reconstruction of a format that I will probably watch forever. Then I proceeded to watch The Reaper, which was also on Netflix, and it's a TV show about Suffolk. I can never say his surname. It was this guy who a bunch of years ago, I think in the 80s or 70s, he was strangling women, mainly sex workers, in an area in England. It was in London, it was toward Manchester or Leeds. I'm not remembering things correctly. The reason why I don't remember things correctly clearly is that because I was never particularly fascinated by this guy. I did study him on books before. I did read about him before. I was vaguely familiar with him, but overall it was a nice documentary, but it didn't hold my interest. I got distracted. I don't know if it's because I don't care about the case in itself, or I didn't find the Netflix documentary particularly entertaining, or it was a combination of both. I gave it 3 stars though. A lot of people from my course in university loved it. We are all a bunch of forensic psychology students, so it might be for you. It wasn't necessarily for me. I think it was too long and it could have been a bit more compacted. But now, talking about actual documentaries that were very well done and scared the living shit out of me is The Night Stalker. This is another true crime based on the crimes of Richard Ramirez in Los Angeles and a couple of some in San Francisco throughout the 80s in USA. And he is a very peculiar serial killer, as usually serial killers tend to have a pattern or a targeted victim, or a victim that they like to target in particular. For example, Suffolk, that guy from The Reaper, he targeted sex workers, for example. While Richard Ramirez, it was kind of unique in his genre because he didn't have a type. He would honestly sexually assault and brutally kill anybody. So he assaulted children, he assaulted men and women and killed them without any pattern, which made it very difficult to then catch him. And I gave these 4 stars. It was, I think, very well done. It was definitely very creepy, and it was fascinating at the same time, hearing the stories of the real detective that followed the case. It is either very frustrating how he got away for so long, and I do want to wish that these days he wouldn't. Well, first of all, we've got cameras everywhere now, and we've got the DNA. And at times it became a bit frustrating because I believed that a couple of things were not very smartly done. We got an instance where, for example, the police find his dentist and they install an alarm in, so the dentist next time this guy comes in can just, press the button, the police will come, and they don't test the button, so the button doesn't work, and when he comes in it just goes away without them calling the police, or the police being aware. And it was like, if a button doesn't freaking work, which, how do you fucking install a alarm and you don't test it out? Like, how fucking dumb can you be? But anyway, just, you dentist, you at least ring the police, and instead they didn't. So it was just a frustration of seeing this guy get away in a couple of instances where he should have been caught there and immediately. he should not have killed more, and instead he did. So that was frustrating. He was also playing on something of my worst fears, which are breaking in. So this guy would literally break in people's homes from open windows or whatever, and I was a bit hesitant in going into this just because I knew I was gonna be triggered, and instead I managed to handle it quite well, I'd say, but sometimes I still think about this. So on a positive note, skip this if you don't have any spoilers until I keep my hands like this. But it was absolutely amazing to see how actually he was caught, and how people chased him in the streets, and how people stood against him, was literally a monster, and how people stood against him and just they kind of had enough. And it was a very fascinating, it was very heartwarming for how much you can take this word in this context, to see how people actually chased him and caught him. It was a very powerful moment for me to see people actually catching this guy and say, we had enough of being terrorized. It was nice to get this documentary so I could know more about what had happened. I did study about him many years ago, but I've forgotten pretty much everything. And if you're interested in serial killers, he's definitely a one of a kind, which makes him on one side very interesting to study if you are in the field, but is potentially one that can be very triggering for many. For me, it is very triggering. I honestly, just thinking about him makes me shiver. Very disgusting in general. So it's one of those that I kind of tend to stay clear of. I know enough, basically. And I don't know if it's more despicable him or the women and men that sent him emails, love emails, or kind of went to the trial or went where he was to cheer him up, or send him nudes. The documentary tackles a little bit about how people actually became fan of Richard Ramirez, which was like,
a few moments later.
This kind of people makes me very, very angry. I think they are very disrespectful for all the people that lost their lives, innocent victims. I think honestly these people are scum, meaning that they are the worst that can be. I honestly think they are as bad as the serial killer themselves. And I don't say that I hate or like to judge people, but I definitely judge these people, and I judge them and find them not worthy. You have to be truly a loser to seek the attention of a serial killer. Get help. Then I watched I'm a Killer, the second season. Unfortunately, I didn't like this one very much. The premise of this TV show, real crime, true crime TV show on Netflix, is that in the first season at least, they went to interview people on death row, or they had just recently been on death row, and they tell their stories and they interview them, so they are able to tell themselves their story. And I found the first season very fascinating, and there were some very touching cases in that season. However, in this season, they kind of spread out and interviewed anybody who had ever killed somebody, and it lost a bit of interest just because some cases, I don't know if it was the death row factor. It's just something that, because we don't have it here in Europe, it's very new for me. So I get interested in hearing actually someone on death row, because it's such a different reality from what we live in. So the second season suffered because it was less legal, in that sense that people had killed somebody but were not necessarily on death row. However, it's still a very fascinating TV show overall. It's very interesting as someone who's studying these things to hear from their perspective, and I ended up giving this 3 stars. I would definitely suggest these in general if you are into crime. I think it is a fascinating idea that I hope we'll have other seasons. I don't know, I went in thinking it was about people on death row again, and it wasn't, and I don't know, maybe I just ruined it just because of my expectations. First movie I watched was The Midnight Star. This is something that's starring and it's directed, if I'm not mistaken, by George Clooney. And it is a kind of post-apocalyptic story where they got this lone man left alone in Antarctica, or in a very cold place, and where people are going underground to hide from a disease that has spread, something of the sort. And he instead decides to not go, to stay in this Antarctica station because of his own reasons, and I don't want to spoil anything. And I give this 2.5 stars. It's just not my kind of story. I guessed what the twist was pretty much soon. Again, such limited cast of characters, such a self-contained story that only so much could have been going on. Visually, it was pleasing. There was nothing wrong with it. Even the plot twist was nice. However, I don't think it was so innovative as it probably was aiming for. I feel like this kind of sci-fi post-apocalyptic thing, very quiet movie, you might enjoy this. Then I watched Soul. This is the new Pixar movie, or among the newest Pixar movies, which I watched on Disney Plus. And this is the story of this guy who has a job that he's not very happy for. He wants to be a musician all his life. Finally, he gets his occasion once he dies. He dies all of a sudden, and he is distraught because he was finally getting to live his dream. And what happens is that he goes in a kind of purgatory. I call it purgatory, and he manages to flee the purgatory and go back on Earth. But while doing so, he brings another soul who is very upset, very angry with everything, and he brings her along with him, and they go on an adventure. And it's a very, again, quiet and powerful movie by Pixar. Pixar never disappoints. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. It was passing on a very important message, and it's a quiet movie about how, you know, dreams, they don't have to be big to be dreams or to motivate you or to push you forward. And it doesn't matter what is your motivation or goal in life, as long as you strive toward it and as long as you can cherish what you have in life, then that's enough. So I think it's that message that was so powerful, and I enjoyed it so much. Then I watched The Professor and The Madman. I found this on Prime, and I was curious because this is based on a true story, and this is the story of this doctor who served the war, and upon returning from the war he ended up in England. I don't remember how, and while being in England he started suffering from schizophrenia. And the way schizophrenia worked in his case was that he had many years of persecution. So I thought there was someone chasing him and trying to kill him, and of course there wasn't anybody, but he ended up basically randomly thinking that a guy is about to kill him, and he kills him instead. And then he's brought to an asylum because he's dangerous, clearly, and is found insane. At the same time, you have the story of how this humble man who is very literate, that, you know, with his skills managed to kind of get somewhere in life. When it comes down to his job and position in society, he is tasked with putting together the first dictionary of English language. So this is a true story of how these two men end up working together, and it was a great movie. I ended up giving this again 4.5 stars. Awesome performances, very touching, and the fact that this is based on true life events, I always find fascinating, basically, to see something that might, to a certain degree, have played out in real life at one point. It was extremely sad, though. It's a very hard watch, but I did not say that it's a tragic watch, and I don't want to say anything else. Then I watched probably one of the best movies I have seen in a while, which is The Green Book. And The Green Book is the story of these two characters that come from very different positions in life, and at the same time they're both discriminated for very different reasons. And the first character you follow is this Italian descendant man who is a driver, and he's trying to get food on the table for his family, and he's got a lot of relatives, and he's speaking with an accent, and he's a driver, and he ends up applying for a position to be the driver of our second main character, who is this brilliant black man who's a musician, and he's a pianist, and he's very talented, and he has got something planned. He's got a tour planned, and he needs someone to drive him around and at the same time be his bodyguard, because we're talking about USA in the, I don't know, 50s, 60s, around that time, I believe. This is another movie based on a true story. And from the journey we go on, from the performances, from the social discussion and about discrimination that are going on, this is perfection. Like, I honestly, you know, there are movies like this of this genre around, and I've watched a few of them and I enjoyed pretty much them all, but none of them as struck me as much as this one has. It's just brilliant, and if you take away anything from this video, is go and watch the Green Book. Then I have watched Ray. This is the story of Ray Charles. I went on a binge of watch movies based on real life, didn't I? So this is the story of Ray Charles, and this is an extremely lengthy movie that I found on Amazon Prime, and I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I'm not a fan. I do recognize his genius and how he managed to make a name for himself in a time that was working against him on all sides. I, however, found the movie a bit too long, and just not being a huge fan of him, I was just a bit less interested compared to how much this might be loved by someone who's a big fan of Ray Charles, if it makes sense. Then I watched What We Do in the Shadows. Now, this is a foreign movie. I don't remember where it was from, but I found on Amazon Prime. And let me tell you, this movie, despite the fact that you might not like it, it's definitely not for everybody. It's a very niche movie that not many probably will appreciate. It is freaking genius. Like, take away, you might not enjoy this, but you have to recognize that there are some very smart people behind this, especially if you like fantasy in general and urban fantasy. So this movie, the premise is that you got these vampires living in modern life, and what you get is that you get a documentary. So you're not watching a movie, you're watching a documentary of how these very old vampires live in modern days, and it's structured and directed as if you were watching a documentary. The ones you watch on YouTube, you can clearly see scenes are not perfect, you move and it's blurry sometimes, and it's very real, it's very human. But I'd say that this is very vampire, if you want. Honestly, it feels like if vampire were real, they would be like that. They would behave like that. They would be absurd. So this is like a very dark humor that is kind of a parody of vampires genre. And it's saying, we all guys fancy vampires and think it's so cool being vampires. But this is what it would look like in real life. This is how absurd it would be. So it is genius. So silly. And nothing of that was beautiful. Like it was honestly cringy, but in a freaking genius way. So I recommend this definitely, especially if you like vampires. It's like you have a good laugh and you realize how my obsession is actually freaking hilarious if you think about that, because that's what it would look like in real life. It's definitely not fancy or not romantic as we think it would be. And then I binge watched all the X-Men. I had watched the first one before, but I'd never seen all the others. And I went in chronological order, although I know that there are two timelines. I found out that toward the end because things didn't make sense. But anyway, in chronological order, I watched Days of Future Past, of which I really enjoyed. I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I watched Wolverine Origins. I gave it 3 stars to these. I had actually already seen pieces here and there of these. It never held my attention, and I do agree. I think it's one of the weakest ones. That's just my opinion. I like Wolverine, but I'm not pulling my hair out for Wolverine, so I guess that also plays a part, just personal taste. I watched Apocalypse, and I gave it these 4.25 stars. Awesome evil guy in this, awesome enemy. I really like the story. Definitely reminded me a bit of Avengers, but I really like this and the powers. It was so fascinating. Dark Phoenix, 4.5 stars, probably one of my favorite to this date. Really like the performances, fascinating story. I really like Jane as X-Men, it's probably my favorite one, so of course I loved her story. X-Men 2, I gave it probably 3 stars and 3.5 stars to the Wolverine, and I think the last 10 was around 4 stars. I really liked those as well, but definitely less stronger than the US releases, just because graphically speaking, when you got something that's a lot to do with powers and special effects, of course, movies that are recently released are just more appealing visually than the old ones. But I really enjoyed the saga. I really enjoyed overall my, binge watch of these, and I would say that I gave overall a 4 solid stars to X-Men. I will now follow along. The last one I need to watch is Logan. I couldn't find that in any platform that I'm subscribed to at the moment, and I don't want to pay for it. And finally, the last movie I watched was, actually I watched this while watching the others one night randomly. It's After We Collided. I put here the thing. So I read the book. It's one of the worst books I've ever read. And then I decided to see if the movie redeemed it. It didn't. And then I decided to watch the sequel just because, you know, those trashy movies that you love to hate. I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm honestly watching a movie just to see how much I can hate something. The movies themselves, I don't hate them. I think they are just love stories, which I honestly watch probably 2 a year, 3 a year max. So it was okay. I don't like the main characters, and I don't really like the male actor is acting. I find it a bit, I don't know, weird. So I ended up giving this 2 stars. I don't know why I'm watching this. I'm just curious to see if there are some elements that will save a love story that's supposedly epic. Can't find any epicness in these so far. I might watch the last one just, you know, because I'm OCD. I like to finish things when I start them. So thank you for watching, and I will try to do my next one in a timely fashion. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any recommendations, stuff I should definitely watch, especially when it comes down to platforms like Disney, Netflix, or Amazon Prime. And I wish you a good rest of the day or evening, depending where you are. Take care. I'll see you next time. Ciao!